Dankeschön. Hello, everybody. Guten Abend. I'm sorry, my German is, you've heard all of the German that I know now. So I will be talking in English, and I want to talk about value-focused knowledge management. Now, for many years, we've been struggling with this issue of value. And many people have said you can't measure the value of knowledge management. Well, I think you can, and I think as part of the new normal world, demonstrating and measuring the value of knowledge management will become expected, and it'll become a normal thing to do. Simon, thank you very much for your introduction. I have an introduction slide here, and that's really for the benefit of people who download my slides after the event. Gesundheit.
Perhaps everybody who's not speaking, like everybody besides Mick, please turn off your microphone and also your camera. Kai, you always have your camera still on. Just turn it out for the first 30 minutes, then you can. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, and I'll leave this slide in the deck because it's got all of my contact details over on the left-hand side. You can see my my blog. I blog every week, my company website, my email address at the top, my Twitter handle at the bottom. So we're going to be talking about value and the value that knowledge brings and the value that knowledge management brings. And to illustrate the value, I want to show you a little video. And this is one of these team building exercises that I'm sure you have all done at one time or another, where you have to cross the floor of a gymnasium stepping only on 3 bricks. Watch the guy in the middle. This is the interesting thing, what happens with the guy in the middle. They're all starting to applaud because that's fantastic. He's crossed that floor in just over 10 seconds. And the other 2 were still on the starting block. So he's perhaps 10 times the speed of the others. What does he have that the others don't have? Does he have more bricks? Does he have better bricks? No, he's got exactly the same materials that the other 2 have. Is he more athletic? Does he have longer legs? No, he's just a normal guy and he looks much the same as the other 2. What he has that they don't have is knowledge. He knows a better practice. He knows a better way to do this exercise. And they don't. They don't have that knowledge at all. They're starting probably with 0 knowledge. They've never done this before. He's obviously done this before and he's practiced it. So what we're looking at here is a range of performance. There's one person who's much better than the other 2 because he has knowledge that they don't. This is a knowledge management issue, if you like. Why has he not shared his knowledge with the other 2? Maybe he doesn't want to. Maybe he likes being the winner. Maybe he doesn't even think of it. Maybe he doesn't even think that maybe a good thing to do would be to bring the other 2 up to speed. Or maybe there is no mechanism for him to share his knowledge. There is effectively no knowledge management in this exercise. Now, that comes with a cost. And if we look at the results of this little exercise, person number 3, our guy in the middle, crosses the floor in 10 seconds. The other 2, well, let's say it's 100 seconds. We don't actually know because the video doesn't show us how long. Where you see this sort of thing in your organization, where you see one team that performs better than the others, where you see a sales team, for example, who always has the best sales results, where you see a factory that always has the best production results, you know that there's a lack of knowledge sharing. And that comes with a cost. I'm going to call it the cost of lost knowledge because person 3 has the knowledge, persons 1 and 2 don't. So it's got lost between the 2 of them. And in this little exercise we saw, the cost of the lost knowledge is 180 seconds. because each of those two people, person one, person two, took 90 seconds longer than they had to. So this is a cost of lost knowledge. I call it lost knowledge because knowledge exists in the room, but it's got lost between person number 3 and person 1 and person 2. There is a cost of no knowledge because maybe you could cross that room in 5 seconds instead of 10 if you knew an even better way. The cost of no knowledge, we don't really know what that is. We can't quantify it, but the cost of lost knowledge is fairly easy. It is the difference between the best performance and the rest. With knowledge management, this loss, this cost of lost knowledge, in this case 180 seconds, can be averted, and this value can be gained. People can do this exercise 10 times faster than they used to. Now, we are not in the business of crossing floors on blocks. We are in the business of serving customers, building things, making products, selling products. But still, every time we see uneven performance like this, there is lost knowledge, which carries a cost. And with knowledge management, that cost can be averted and that value can be gained. So we come back to this cycle. It's an old cycle. I think we all understand it, that if you have a body of knowledge that you can access, and then you apply that knowledge, you perform at the top level. And if you learn from that performance, you can increase the body of knowledge and you apply that and you perform even better. So we get a continuous improvement cycle. Knowledge management is the discipline that drives that cycle. We measure the value of knowledge management by the performance improvement it delivers. So first of all, we bring everybody's knowledge together. We define best practice, and we bring everybody up to the speed of the best. We can apply that, we could perform, and if those 3 guys all had the same knowledge, they would perform in 1/7 of the time that they did the first time around. Then knowledge management can start to drive a continuous improvement cycle, improving knowledge, improving performance, and so on. So initially, we're aiming for if one person knows, everybody knows. And then we're moving on to if one person learns, everybody learns. Now, I'm going to say right now that the more clearly you can define and measure performance in your organizations, the easier it will be to demonstrate and measure the value of knowledge management. If you work for an organization where performance management is difficult, KM value management is also difficult. But most of the time, there's something we can measure. I'm going to give you some examples now, and then we're going to look at what you can do and what everybody can do, I think, in the new normal world, to look at the value side of knowledge. The first example I want to give you is a classroom example. And this is an exercise that I've done in face-to-face training for 20 years now. And it consists of dividing the participants into teams. And here we see a team of 5 people. We give them some materials and we ask them to build a tower. And we tell them the tower will be tested with an earthquake and a hurricane, but they should build as high as they can. The only performance metric here is height. They've got a time limit, but the metric is height. And here they are, they've built their first construction and it's about 1 meter tall. We then go through various knowledge management activities. We bring knowledge management into the piece. And after a while, we let them build again. It's the same team. You can see the guy with the stripy jumper. He's about the same height in both pictures. And look at the height of the construction they've built. That's 3 times their initial construction. Let me unpack this a little bit more and tell you the sort of thing we do to help them gain value from the knowledge management that we give them. Here are some statistics. These are 4 training courses from different industries. We'll look at this first one, the nuclear industry. There are 3 teams, and the teams register We'll look at team B, register 5 different heights. The first tower height in grey, then 3 more, and then the second tower height in black. After they built their first tower, they do an after-action review, and they gather their own knowledge, and they generally see that they could perform about 40% better using their own knowledge. We then do a second exercise. We have we treat the class as a community of practice. They share knowledge with each other, and they realize that if they use each other's knowledge, on average, they can perform about 80% better. Then we show them best practice, the best practice that's been developed over 20 years of doing this exercise. They build the tower again, and on average, they do 220% better than they started. This is, I think this for me is proof that knowledge management works, certainly here on a short cycle, but also that it works on a long cycle. Because if we look back over the 20 years we've done this exercise, to start with, we had no body of knowledge. We just we'd not done it enough to know what best practice was. People were building around 2 meters. This is the second tower that they do, by the way. It's not their first attempt, the second one. And at this point here, we introduced the body of knowledge, and we sparked continuous improvement until people were building 4.5, 5 meter towers, which were really difficult to fit into classrooms. So we cut the amount of material we gave them in half, and still continuous improvement ever since. This is, I think you can very easily say knowledge management here has demonstrated value in a classroom setting. Let's look at it in a real life setting. I'm going to give you 3 stories, and then I'm going to point you to a number of more stories where value has been measured. This first one, this is from the oil sector. This is an example of repeat activity. And this is British Petroleum in Trinidad and Tobago starting a new program of building offshore gas platforms. The first one was Cannonball. The 5th one was Surrey. And the graph here shows the engineering time in months. The text on this slide is from the BP press release, and it says at the bottom, by living the concept of continuous improvement, which is now being embedded across BPTT, we've taken the lessons from each project and applied them to the next. And you see the projects getting faster and faster. If they'd all taken 14 months, like Cannonball, there would have been a considerable cost of lost knowledge. By harvesting knowledge to drive that cost down, they have delivered over the program of 5 platforms, 17 months saving. And that translates into about $200 million worth of gas sales. So a clear, easy metric, engineering time, and by focusing on knowledge, they've driven that down. Story number 2. This is a British utility, Severn Trent Water. They introduced, this comes from an article written by Emily Timmins, who was their knowledge implementation business leader. And they introduced communities of practice a few years ago. And she realized that where you can measure realized value is taking the ideas and lessons and knowledge from that community of practice and putting them into the design and operating standards. That effectively is the body of knowledge. That is the best practice. Their standards are best practice. And over the pilot period, changes to those standards have resulted in millions of pounds of efficiency savings. So here the measure is money. They're looking at efficiency, they're looking at cost, they're also looking at time. And she goes on to say that in addition to this, they capture stories about the benefits that the communities of practice have brought, because as well as just quoting the value, you have to show the link between knowledge management and value delivery. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. A third story, and then we can talk more generally. This third story is from Kent Greenis, who is an old colleague of mine. He's now a consultant in the US. And here we're looking at a single knowledge management intervention, a peer assist or a series of peer assists that a project team held to help them access knowledge of others in order to reduce the time to bring a new product to market. Metric here is time. At the bottom line, the result of all of this knowledge sharing is that new product was tested with consumers and brought to market 6 months earlier than planned. Now, there will be a dollar benefit to that because you've accelerated sales by 6 months, but this is a pretty good metric. You can see 3 cases there where we can measure the value that knowledge has brought. And if you follow the link here, which you'll see when you get the slides at the end of this, I've got 140 more stories like this on my blog. If you look around, there are plenty of value stories. And if anybody's listening to this talk who has a story where the value of knowledge has been quantified, please let me know, and I'll put that on my blog as well. And we will see if we can get to 200 stories. That would be nice. Okay, there are a number of ways that knowledge can add value. In fact, I explored this question of tangible benefits in the 3 surveys that I've done of global management over the past 7 years. And one of the questions that we asked the people who replied, and we've got replies now from well over 1,000 knowledge managers around the world. One of the questions was, in which area has knowledge management delivered tangible benefit? And here we see their votes. The highest one is reduced time to find information. And I think practically anything you do with knowledge management will help with that. But it's not actually, it doesn't actually gain you very much. It's an internal efficiency, but it's nowhere near the value that you get by sharing better knowledge. Sharing knowledge better is good. Sharing better knowledge is 100 times more valuable. We see reduced time to competence for new staff, reduced project and cycle time and costs, improved customer satisfaction, improved market share, improved bid win-loss ratio. All of these are measurable. All of these are ways of measuring performance. And if we introduce knowledge management, we should see that performance increase, that performance improve. And in fact, I'm going to show you a second graph with the same horizontal axis, but I've broken out the vertical bars by the maturity of knowledge management. So you can see for each of these, the replies from people who are in the early stages of knowledge management in blue, in the middle stages in red, in the late stages in green, and green where KM is fully embedded. And you see a lot of these benefits really coming quite late on, with the exception of this reduced time to find information, because that you can get to that one pretty quickly. But things like improving your bid win-loss ratio or improving your customer satisfaction, it takes a little while for KM to be embedded enough to deliver that value. These are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ways in which KM benefit can be identified. But we also asked them, if you can quantify that benefit, how much value has KM delivered? And I'm going to show you some tables here because the value will vary depending on how long you've been doing KM and also how big your organization is. If we look at the average value, for example, against the size of the organization, as you might expect, the bigger organizations deliver more value. Also, as you might expect, the number of years you've been doing knowledge management impacts the value. Here's the value here. Now, this second row, I've got a spurious result that I haven't been able to track down. If we take that one result out, it looks a bit more sensible that you've got 0.2, 0.4, 6, 55, 154 million. These The longer you do it, the more value you deliver, but also the longer you do it, the more value you deliver per year. So I think that the message here is keep at it. You know, you've got to be doing KM about 4 years or more before you really start to see the value come in. Now, we've talked about value. We've talked about value measured by improved performance. We've talked about some of the things you can measure, but why bother? Why would you like to measure value? What's it going to do for you? Well, I think, first of all, to secure funding. Your senior management in an organization are not going to give you money unless they're going to get money back in return. And they would like to know sooner or later whether that has been a wise investment. So I think it's helpful in the early stages to estimate the value KM can deliver, and in the later stages to demonstrate that, yes, you are delivering that value and that you should continue to be funded. In addition to securing funding, it shows everybody in the organization, including the skeptics, that KM is a worthwhile activity. It's worth doing. It also helps you to improve KM over time because you can measure the value of the things you do. And then finally, if you want compliance with ISO 30401, then you're going to have to do some sort of value measure because it's written in there. It's written in the clauses. Most importantly, in clause 4.1, the first of the requirements in the ISO standard is that you have defined outcomes for the KM system. And by outcomes, we're really talking about something valuable. We're not just talking about a working KM system being an outcome. That's no good at all. We're looking at things like more efficient staff. We're talking about, well, I'll show you some of the outcomes in a moment. Once we have these outcomes from clause 4.1, in clause 6.2, we translate those into objectives for particular interventions. And those should be, according to the standard, measurable, if at all practicable, in terms of benefits and impacts. And then clause 9.1, we're required to have a monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation system where we can track those objectives and we can track those outcomes. Let's have a look at outcomes. And again, I'm going to go back to my surveys. Here are the most important outcomes that people are looking for from knowledge management. And that pie has got 4 slices of about 20% each, and then 2 slices of 8%. And those 4 bigger slices are internal efficiency, time and cost reduction, better service to customers and clients, operational effectiveness, which is about quality. It's about doing things better, not necessarily doing them faster or cheaper. Over here, retaining knowledge at risk of loss. And that's about business continuity. That's about continuing to do the things that we do now. We've got this one, company growth, and this one, innovation. Each of those is measurable. And each of us in our knowledge management programs should be thinking, what's the one that's most important for us? Because that's the one we'll focus on, and that's the one where we'll track the value, and that's the one where we'll report the value. Once you understand the outcome, you need to think through, how does knowledge management impact that outcome? And here, if you've not done this before, I would really recommend trying a benefits map. A benefits map is a way of mapping from what you're going to do towards what you hope to see. And it's an exercise that you can do with your management, if you're lucky, with your senior management. And it really helps them buy into the whole concept. Because I think in a lot of people's heads, it's really difficult to see, how does KM translate into money? So what we do in a benefits map, we have a column on the left that says these are the key knowledge management components and activities that we're going to put in place, and a column on the right, which is the company strategic objectives. And we're going to try and fill the gap between the two. and we first ask the question, if we do these things on the left, what does that make possible? For example, if we have better knowledge sharing in projects, it might mean that at the project start, we have a higher level of knowledge. Okay, but what does that make possible? Okay, then, well, maybe that means that we've got fewer loopbacks because we've closed a lot of the knowledge gaps before we start. Okay, great, but what does that make possible? Faster projects. And now we've hit something that's measurable. In fact, number of loopbacks is measurable too, but faster projects. We're getting now into this column here of measurable outcomes: portfolio size and relevance, faster projects, higher quality, happier staff, reduction in time to competence. Any of these could be an outcome that you want to track. How do we measure the value that we're delivering? Because we can set up this benefits map up front. We can say, here's the mechanism by which we deliver value. We still have to demonstrate it. Well, there are two ways, and our stories have told us those ways already. The first one is a before and after comparison. And I've got some more stories here on this page. The first one here from Halliburton. During the first year the community was in place, the company recognized a 71 million cost saving in procurement and materials. This was a procurement and materials community. So that's a before and after the first year. And I think this is an interesting statement. While KM was not the only factor in that improvement, senior leaders agree it was an important contributing factor. So KM didn't deliver all the value, but it was an enabler. We can talk about knowledge-enabled value. So we can do a before and after, or we can do a transactional value. We can look at individual examples of knowledge sharing. Here's a team asking a network for guidance. This single collaboration saved several $1 million. Here, Siemens. I'm sure there are people in this audience who understand Siemens better than I do, but certainly at one stage on TechnoWeb, if you sent out a request for knowledge, you had to put a value on that request. And the big value requests got the most attention. So that not only prioritizes knowledge sharing, it gives you a way of tracking value. Because if the requests were answered, you've already defined the scale of value you're going to get. Now, you would back up these measures with stories just to illustrate that you really are delivering what you say. So I think there you go. There are other metrics that you can put in. You can metricate that benefits map in many ways, but outcome value is the big one. 2 slides to finish. The first slide is what I would recommend as the ideal approach in the new normal if you are focusing on value. First of all, you determine the outcome you need knowledge management to impact, and that's clause 4.1 in the ISO standard. I would draft a benefits map and explore how you will make the link between knowledge management intervention and that value. I would get some idea of the scale of the current cost of lost knowledge. You look at the difference between the best performing teams and the worst performing teams, the best performing and the worst performing factories, the best performing sales team and the worst performing sales team. And where that difference in performance is due to difference in knowledge, then you've got lost knowledge. Look at repeat mistakes. Look at things you know have not been learned and not been transferred. If you add these up, if you've got enough evidence and you add up all of these costs, you generally find that cost of lost knowledge is enormous. Run pilots which address business issues and which will have measurable outcomes. Use value delivery evidence from the pilots to secure funding. Then you define your network, your framework, sorry. You define the objectives, the plans, the accountabilities, the metrics. You fill in all of the elements of the ISO standard. You implement the KM framework, and then you wait and see. Well, you don't just wait. You support the organization in operating that framework, and you watch the value come in, and you watch that cost of lost knowledge disappearing. And then you repeat, because you're going to have to repeat this every year. If you're financed every year as a team, then you need to keep repeating and reporting value. I've got one final message before I stop. And this is going back to that concept of the cost of lost knowledge. The cost of lost knowledge, it's not infinite. It is finite. With our 3 guys crossing the floor, there was 180 seconds of lost knowledge. You can probably impact much of that fairly quickly. In any organization, you will have some quick wins, some no-brainers here where you do very little and you deliver a lot of value. But as you approach the bottom of the cost of lost knowledge, it gets harder and harder to deliver that remaining 1% or 2%. It's one of these curves where, you know, there's an easy head and a long, arduous tail. And there's an optimum place, I think, to put your knowledge management efforts. And it's right here where your KM spend, well, the value, the cost, the value generated divided by the KM spend is the required ROI. If you're spending less than that, you might get, say your management come to you and say you can have $1 million and we want to see $10 million back every year. If you spend $1 million but you get $20 million back, you can go to management and say, actually, you give us more and we'll give you more back. If you spend your $1 million and you only get $8 million back, you've overreached and you probably need to scale off a little bit. Now, this is just, I don't think anybody really can quantify this so easily and so well as to define that sweet spot. But this is just a graph to show that you're never going to get all of that cost of lost knowledge. You'll get most of it and you'll get much of it, and then you should stop. This is probably where I should stop. I've talked for half an hour and I'm sure you have some questions.